Hi, Tobias. Thank you so much for joining me today. I absolutely loved your book that I can see lots of copies right behind you. Anything but fine. Uh,
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
right. And you already know, like, ever since the cover was announced, I was super excited to be reading this. And finally, I got around to it and I loved it. So before we go ahead and talk about Luca and Jordan and Amelia and all of those wonderful characters that you've created, I was hoping if you could quickly tell us a little about yourself and then maybe also tell us a little about the book without giving any spoilers for all the viewers who'll watch this and discover the new title.
Sure. My name's Tobias, obviously. I live in Sydney in Australia. I'm originally from a town called Ballarat in Victoria, which is in southeastern Australia, which happens to be where the book is set as well. So it's a
Right.
country town.
Right.
Um, and it's not super small. It's about 100,000 people, I think, but we still very much call it a country town. Yeah, so I grew up there, and then I studied the performing arts and performed in musicals for about 10 years around Australia and New Zealand and on a cruise ship and lots of
Wow.
different places like that, which was, the cruise ship was amazing. Like I got to go to, I think, 36 different countries or something like that. And see the whole world when I was kind of fresh out of university. So that was amazing. But yeah, I did that for a long time and then eventually decided to look for something else.
Mhm.
And so I kind of simultaneously started writing, but also working towards getting a job in the publishing industry.
Right.
And, I've been super lucky that both of those things did happen. I now work in publishing in the marketing and publicity department for a big publisher in Australia. And then, yeah, now I have this book. So I'm kind of super grateful for the last few years and where I've ended up.
Right.
Um, and then the book itself, so Anything But Fine is about a 16-year-old ballet dancer, Luca Mason, who is incredibly gifted and is on track to sort of join the Australian Ballet School and then hopefully the Australian Ballet Company and, live this kind of professional ballet dancer life until he falls down a flight of stairs at his dance studio and shatters basically all the bones in his left foot, which leaves him with an injury that, he kind of can't recover from enough to be a professional dancer. So then after that happens, he loses his scholarship to his very fancy private school and has to transfer to the local public school down the road and say goodbye to all of his friends and kind of the only life he's ever known and start from scratch at 16. And that's kind of where the story begins. And then we follow his journey from there.
Absolutely. I think when I was reading it, at a point when, and of course, because you've already mentioned about the scholarship and him being have to leave the fancy school, I think I was just hoping that this couldn't get more bad. Like you have thrown every single thing that you could have thrown at poor Luca, and he is just struggling to start his life, and he does that so well. I mean, I would give it to him. Uh, so talking about Luca, like he's such a three-dimensional character. You grow to care for him over the book, and there are certain choices which at least I wasn't very happy with that he made. But then there were certain choices that I'm very proud that he makes. So on that note, I would love to ask, like, how much of Luca's story is your story?
Um, I mean, definitely bits and pieces. It's probably a lot of people, I think, assume that the story is a lot more autobiographical than it is. But there are definitely so many similarities between Luca and I,
Right.
in our love of dance and all of that sort of stuff. And we both grew up gay in a country town.
Mm-mm.
But, Luca is out and proud. He came out when he was 14 in this country town, and I myself didn't come out until I had left Ballarat and started uni in a much
Right.
kind of bigger city. So we're different in that way. But then I guess we also share that thing where Luca lost this huge part of his identity,
Mm-mm.
and I went through a sort of similar journey when I decided to stop performing, and it wasn't sort of ripped away from me by an
Mm-mm.
injury, but it was still that thing of being like, oh, if I'm not a dancer anymore, then what am I, who am I, that kind of thing. So
Right.
I did have a sort of a smaller version of that, and much later on in life, which I guess is a lot easier to process than for a 16-year-old. So definitely lots of similarities, but you know, in terms of what I was like at school, I was probably much more like Amina, the kind of typical nerd, you know, the know-it-all, the the kind of good student.
Right.
Yeah, so bits and pieces.
Right. I'm glad that you mentioned Amina, because I think if I had to pick one favorite character, it would be Amina. And she was such an instant favorite of mine. I would love to be friends with someone like Amina. Like,
Me
she is
too.
the absolute best friend. And there were times I was like, Luca, you need to do more for your best friend. Like, you know, she's constantly there for you. And I was just recording my, you know, my YouTube video reaction and review for your book yesterday. And I said, you know, I said it there, like, I wish and I hope that Tobias ever in the future considers writing like a spin-off where, you know, Amelia is the main character, or, you know, maybe she comes back again, because she's such a fun character to follow. And I was reading some Goodreads review for your book, and every single person has mentioned her, you know, has given like special mention to Amelia and how much they enjoy it. So, you know, so where does that come from? Do you have a friend? Because again, you know, Amelia was a different representation, not that you're similar to. So, and you know, and acing that was again something which is very important in the world that we live in, where own voices has gradually become more important. And you know, and if anything goes wrong, people are cancelled on Twitter. So on that note, like, you know, how would you say that? How have you handled that?
Yeah, and you're right. Amina is probably the crowd favorite with everyone. Even I don't usually go on Goodreads, but I have gone on a couple of times, and even people that hated the book still said that Amina was one of their favorite characters ever. So I'm like, well, that's got to
I
count for
can't
something.
believe people hated the book. Like, who are these people?
Everyone hates something.
Right.
But yeah, I love her, and I think, you know, I yeah, I wish I knew what it was that people connected with so strongly, but I think she's just, you know, she just tries so hard, and she just means so well, and she goes above and beyond. And I think it is that thing of, we all kind of see in Amina, you know, the kind of friend we would like to have, but also the kind of friend we would like to be to our
Yeah.
own friends. And I think she's kind of a bit, you know, aspirational in that sense. And you know, that's what she's like for Luca. He learns so much about friendship from her, coming from this, you know, this world where his friends were quite competitive and a bit bitchy, and then he sees what she's like.
Pretentious. Mm.
Yeah, and he's like, oh, that's how I need to be a friend. And you know, it takes him
Right.
a long time, and he makes a lot of mistakes along the way, but eventually he does kind of realize, you know, that
Right.
that's what it takes to be a good friend. But a lot of the inspiration for Amina's culture and her background is from a really good friend of mine, who, you know, I was so lucky to be able to sit down with and talk really openly and honestly about her own experience growing
Right.
up, Indonesian and Muslim in Sydney, which, you know, as a writer was just such a gift for me to be able to have that kind of really kind of frank and, yeah, an open conversation about her own experience. Because if it weren't for that, I don't think I would have been able to write Amina's character in that way. You know, and we had that conversation before I even started kind of plotting the book or outlining the book, because I just knew that if I was going to include that character, which was kind of just how Amina popped into my head, that I really would need to get it right. And so, yeah, we sat down very early on in the process. You know, and I think my first question for my friend was like, do you think I can write this character? You know, do you think that's even okay? And she, you know, was really supportive and really encouraging. And you know, I think it's really amazing to be able to include that extra kind of layer of diversity in the story. And I think, you know, it's just great to be able to represent the real world, you know, how I see it. And yeah, to have that beautiful character there who represents so many wonderful things. Yeah, it's been really special. And I'm just so happy that everyone likes Amina.
Absolutely. I think coming to my favorite scenes, one of them has Amina in it. And it's a scene where, again, I can't give away too much because it would be a spoiler, but there's this one scene where, you know, Amina hand paints t-shirts and posters. And she wants Luca to wear them and then go out to this thing that they're going to. And that's probably the most cutest, adorable, funniest, a little embarrassing kind of a moment, but yet it's so it's so amazing. And I mean, I would die to have a friend like that and to have an experience like that. So that's definitely one of my favorite scenes. And second was, the one that I told you on chat, like, and it was, again, I have to mention it because it is the most funniest thing. I did not expect to laugh out that loud or gush that much. And I was very confidently, Zoom is on, my online lectures are going on from my university. 50 people are sitting in a classroom studying something very boring. And I have my screen open and I'm reading your book side by side while the class is on. And suddenly, Jordan and Luca are doing something. And I'm like, oh my God, and I'm all blushing and I'm all red. And suddenly the professor goes like, well, what are you doing? Why are you not paying attention? Why are you smiling? And then everybody's looking at me and I'm like, oh, I did not realize my camera is on. So that was definitely one of my favorite scenes. But you as a writer, I'm pretty sure, your entire book is yours. So asking you would be like, picking between your own children. But if you had to, what was your favorite scene to write? And what was the most difficult one to write?
I have a few favorite scenes, and most of them are the scenes where the characters are in pretty big arguments with each other. I really like
The
writing
classic writer
confrontations.
syndrome.
I know, and I think
Writers love to kill their characters or create controversies and drama and, put
exactly.
their readers
It's
to
just
misery.
yeah, there's something about those kind of really high stakes moments, and I'm not like that in real life. Like I would never confront anyone about anything, so it's very freeing for me to write about them in the book. But I think one of my other favorite scenes is when Luca and Jordan first meet, which just was so much fun to write, and so many of those kind of really awkward kind of teenage feelings that you
It's
have.
also so romantic, like very
Yeah,
romantic.
yeah, and that kind of combination of the awkwardness and the romance and kind of people trying to just find where they fit in those situations. I really enjoyed that one.
Right. Now coming to Jordan, because we've discussed so much about the other two. So, like Jordan is this high school rowing captain. He's popular, famous, he's good looking, and Luca instantly has a crush on him. And I couldn't, for the life of me, not draw parallels with Dan, who's your husband. And he does all these plays, and you keep posting about him. So, what were there any inspirations that you drew from his life into your character, or like how did Jordan came about?
Um, I feel like there'd probably be lots of small influences from Dan and from my own kind of relationship, because I think it's hard to not include those kind of
Of course.
feelings and stuff like that
Right.
whenever you're writing that
Right.
kind of thing. But I don't think there's kind of a direct parallel between them. I mean, Dan is not a very sporty person, which
Yeah.
he wouldn't mind me saying. But yeah, I don't know. Jordan just kind of, I really like the idea of Luca falling for someone who was very much on their own journey and had their own
Right.
things going on and could be kind of three-dimensional in that way rather than just kind of the typical kind of pretty boy love interest. And I think it was really interesting for Luca to sort of, fall for someone who was dealing with things that Luca had already dealt with, and that, created a sort of, a bit of conflict between them in certain ways. But also, Jordan is just such a really lovely kind of upstanding guy. And it's, he was just a lot of fun to write, and he's very different to me as well. That kind of, big, strong, popular kind of, football player. It was really just fun to put myself in someone's shoes like that, I think.
Right. I don't know, but I have to say this, but every gay boy or bi boy, I think they always have that one person that they fall for, who's that athletic jock, and most of the times, like, I mean, Luca was very lucky because most of the time, and those are the kind of stories which has given us heaps and heaps of literary fiction where writers have gone on talking about writing heartful and like books that just don't end well, like they don't have the happily ever afters. And I think all of them are classic, the jock and the nerd sort of a relationship. But on that note, there has been a conversation going around in the book world, or whether it's Bookstagram, Twitter, or whatever, in the community, that that we have kind of moved away from coming out stories in terms of LGBTQIA. Like, there was a time when Becky came out and, like she did her Homo sapien versus the gay agenda and all of that. And then we had a series of books. Adam Silvera came up and, all those, the more, like the classic NYA gay literature, we can say them now. They came up, they did lots of coming out stories. And now we are increasingly seeing stories where, the coming out has been a part of the past, and you're seeing just how these people are living their lives. But then here comes the book, Anything But Fine, which essentially is like a coming out story in a lot of ways. And I was surprised because it kind of hits both sides. For Luca, it's about, because he's already out, so he doesn't need to do that. But for Jordan, that coming out is still important. So, where do you see that? Like, do you think that we no longer require coming out stories, or like how do we go about with this?
I always say that I just think we need all kinds of stories still under the kind of LGBTQ umbrella. We have had some really fantastic coming out stories, but I really do think that we are at a point where it's great to have so many stories that don't involve any kind of trauma surrounding someone's sexuality. It is just about, because, gay people do have other problems aside from just being gay, which is great. But, I think particularly for teens growing up in country towns, rural towns, and certain places in the world where coming out is still very much a thing, I think those stories are still really important. And I don't think that those teen readers should have to read books that are, 10, 20 years old to get their coming out stories. Like, I think it's really important that they still see them in a fresh and kind of modern way. So when I was writing Anything But Fine, I felt really strongly about Luca's main conflict not being anything to do with his sexuality, which is why we have him coming out much earlier. And, he has this beautiful supporting father. So, his sexuality is not an issue. But then, I just know that growing up in a town like that, and, my family still live there, I spend a lot of time there. I know that coming out is still a big deal for a lot of queer kids in a place like that. So I thought it would be great to be able to include both and and show that balance, and also show how that, how that interaction between the two boys, with one out and one not, what that's also kind of like, because that's what, a lot of people are experiencing, whether they're teens or they're adults. There's so many things to navigate. So yeah, I think we need everything,
We do.
And whatever story is authentic for the writer, I think is the one that they should be telling. And if that is a coming out story, then
so
tell
be
that
it.
story. I think, yeah.
Absolutely, very well put. So on that note, is like, if today I had to ask you if there was a way for you to, like, let's say, hand out, and like Luca comes to you for advice, he's hell bent in all of those, all the problems that he's surrounded with. What is it, one piece of advice would you offer to him?
I don't know. I feel like a lot of the things that I would say to Luca are the things that Sammy, his occupational therapist, says to him. I feel like that's me as an adult being like, please, just, this is what you should do.
Right.
But I think, I would say to him that, life is long and winding, and you don't have to always know exactly where you're going, to be able to enjoy it and to be able to be happy. And, you may have this dream, and dreams don't always come true. And again, that doesn't mean you can't find happiness somewhere else. And so just trust the process and go with it. And I think Sammy says in the book, the end goal is being happy. So just do whatever makes you happy.
Absolutely. So let me ask, so I read your book, loved it. And I was hoping that I don't know if there is, but are you ever going to consider a sequel? I know this is a question that you're going to get forever as an author, but but would you consider?
Yeah, I don't have any immediate plans to continue their story, but I would also never say never, because I know that, because I really like that the story is a little bit open-ended, especially for teenage readers who then can kind of make up the next part of the journey for themselves in whatever way helps the reader, with their own kind of stuff. So I didn't want to really kind of dictate exactly what happened, but, I adore those characters so much, and they're already such a big part of my life that, if the opportunity did come up, I think it would definitely be something I would consider. I would just have to think really long and hard about what the next part of the journey would be, for those characters, because I would really want it to feel authentic. Sometimes I feel like I've read some sequels where it's felt kind of unnecessary, or like the story has gone in a really weird direction that doesn't kind of feel right for those characters. So yeah, it would be something that I have to think about very, very carefully, because I want it to ring true, but also, be worth telling, kind of not just
you have a lot of time.
chatting.
You have a lot of time ahead of you. I've spoken to Adit Koram, who's the amazing author of Darius the Great books, and he said that he had to wait for 5 years for his sequel. And yesterday my book club did a discussion with Benjamin Ali Resines, who's the author of Ari and Dante books, and he took 9 years for the sequel. So you're definitely in a good position that way.
Yeah, definitely.
So on that note, would you have certain recommendations, book recommendations for people who enjoyed your book to check out next?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone's looking for any other Australian reads like that, I would definitely suggest a book called The Boy from the Mish, which is up here somewhere. I just rearranged my shelf and now I don't know where any of them are, because they're all arranged by color.
I've heard about The Boy from the Mish. Yeah.
That's a beautiful, beautiful book by an author called Gary Lonesborough. Another really great gay YA book, Australian book, is called Invisible Boys by Holden Shepherd. Very, very different to Anything But Fine. It's much kind of grittier and more raw and quite confronting. But it tells a really, really incredible story.
I don't know what it is with Australian authors and Australian gay books, but they're all so amazing. I've happened to read Finn and Ryan Fireflies by Harry Cook.
Yeah.
And again, another brilliant, cute book.
Yeah.
So
beautiful book.
Yeah. And I think next on my radar is Tim Timaro in the Heartsick of Subterranean
Heartsick Blues. Yeah. That one's great. There's another really brilliant one that came out this year called Henry Hamlet's Heart by an author called Rhiannon Wild. Really beautiful book about, a boy who's kind of just about to finish high school and navigating that kind of next step, and also his feelings for his friend and kind of all this, really beautiful stuff. But there's so much wonderful gay YA and queer YA books coming out of Australia. It's really, really cool at the moment.
It's amazing. So on that note, could you tell us what's next for you? I just today I saw you posted a story about, some sort of idea has hit you for a third unnamed novel. But before we go on to that, what's the second book that's coming out next, and what is it about? Is it too early to ask?
No, not too early at all. So my second book is scheduled for publication next year in Australia and 2023, the start of 2023 in America. And it's called Take a Bow, Noah Mitchell. It's about a 17-year-old gamer who goes undercover in a local production of Chicago the Musical, where his mum is playing the lead role, so he can meet his online crush. And so it's kind of like, it sounds really strange, the combination of the gaming world and the theater world. But that was my kind of childhood. That was my two sort of biggest loves as a teenager, was computer games and community theater. So I thought, why not combine them? And it turned out really fun. Like I'm really, really excited for everyone to read it. It's very different to Anything But Fine, but I think I think anyone who enjoyed Anything But Fine will also enjoy this, because it's lots of great characters and those kind of complex relationships and present parents, and it's very, very gay and very fun, and who doesn't love a musical? So yeah.
Doesn't love a musical, absolutely. And in fact, this reminds me a lot of because you mentioned gaming, so and musicals. So it reminds me of this book that I read, which is Gaming and Cosplaying and just fandom, which is this book called Out of Character by Annabeth Albert. That's another amazing book. Like, and it's very steamy. It's an adult contemporary. So it's like red, white, and royal blue. So very amazing.
Awesome.
So thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an absolute amazing conversation. I loved your book. I would love to, say that out once again. I'm waiting for it to get an Indian release. And I think that will happen as soon as it releases in the UK. 2 years we have been independent and free, and yet we follow UK for some reason. But that's just how it is in the publishing world for us.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I mean, I have already put out my, my order on Book Depository, and hopefully it will come soon.
Amazing. No, I
Yeah,
hope so.
yeah. So that's that. But this is amazing. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.